What's going on, Notre Dame fans? This is blueandgold.com's Mike Singer, joined by our senior editor, Lou Samoji, and beat writer, Patrick Engel. We are just one day away from Notre Dame's monumental top 5 matchup with number 1, Clemson. Lou, I'm going to go to you first. What's the anticipation been like for Notre Dame fans? Not only this week, but this game's been circled on the calendar all year, even before or even after the schedule change. That this date locked in on November 7th. It did not change from what the schedule previously was. So what's the anticipation been like this week and really all year for Notre Dame fans?
It's seldom that Notre Dame, especially in the Brian Kelly era, have had these kind of marquee matchups. This is only the second time a top 10 team in Brian Kelly's 11 seasons is coming into Notre Dame Stadium. The other was Stanford when it was number 7 in 2018, but even then Stanford finished the season unranked, so it wasn't a big one. Now, Georgia in 2017, that was highly anticipated, but I believe Georgia wasn't in the top 10. They were like 11th or 14th, so something like that, coming into the game. It was almost like more anticipated by the Georgia fandom than Notre Dame because so many came in. So anytime you have this type of matchup, especially when it's number 1, of course there's going to be tremendous anticipation, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, usually, I mean, look, I grew up around campus during national championships year in 73 and 88 when USC and Miami were the boogeyman, and everyone was just, hey, we got to get these guys. We got to get these guys. There are bedsheet banners all over the campus, nightly pep rallies. Now it's like, hey, stay away from each other, socially distanced, don't want to screw up Saturday or anything. So it's a whole different vibe, but that doesn't make, the importance and the magnitude of the game or result any less.
Now, some folks are kind of talking about this as a lose-lose scenario. Patrick, I know you feel strongly about this. It's kind of like if Notre Dame wins, does it really matter because they didn't have Trevor Lawrence? And then if they lose, it's a huge knock on Brian Kelly because everything has kind of stacked up in Notre Dame's favor in this one. Do you feel like any of that's fair, or do you think the whole lose-lose thing is just ridiculous, Patrick?
Yeah, I've made my feelings known on this throughout the week, and I think the first part of what you said is just completely missing the point of what a Notre Dame win would mean here. Okay, so it's not one of the biggest wins in 130-plus years of Notre Dame football. Even if Notre Dame does win this game without Trevor Lawrence, without a couple of defensive starters, it's still a win over a number 1 team, and more importantly, still the biggest win of the Brian Kelly era. That still sounds pretty good to me. I don't really know how you can look at that as a lose situation unless you're just defeatist and, worried about what the national college football world's perception of Notre Dame is. And that doesn't matter in this case. Clemson doesn't break and just fall apart without Trevor Lawrence. And there have been a lot of good teams that have won national titles and made the playoffs that don't have a generational quarterback like Trevor Lawrence because they have good skill players. They can run the ball. They play good defense. Clemson does all of those. And that just as much as really good quarterback play has been a reason they've lost 2 regular season games since 2015. So they're still a hard team to beat. And, might I add that, they didn't nearly lose to Boston College last week because of the quarterback. I mean, last time I checked, throwing for 340 yards and having 3 total touchdowns in your first career start is pretty good for DJ Uiagalelei. And, he's a top 5 recruit too. So I just don't understand at all why people would be quick to discredit this win at all. I mean, sure, it would be even better without Trevor Lawrence, but what's the opportunity that's still there presented in front of Notre Dame is still a really big one, and what would still be a really good chance to prove a lot of things and measure up.
Now, Lou, that's looking at it from the win side of things. But Lou, I'm curious, what if Notre Dame loses, and then it's, man, is this even ever going to happen under Brian Kelly? I'm sure that's what some fans are going to say.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be one of the main themes afterwards. But, one of the beauties about being in a conference this year is you look back at Notre Dame's other recent epic victories, we have to go way back to 1993 Florida State and 1988 Miami when they were both number one. As an independent, had Notre Dame lost those games, they were finished. There was no hope for any national title. I've said since the beginning of the season, this is only going to be the first meeting between Notre Dame and Clemson. I think there's going to be another one on December 19th for the ACC championship. And as long as you take care of business there and, let's say, not get blown out in this game against Clemson, but even if you beat Clemson on December 19th and hopefully still improve, and hopefully in that game, maybe Clemson might enter with overconfidence almost because of a win over Notre Dame potentially. Whereas right now, I don't look at it as a lose-lose situation either. I think that's ridiculous. I think people look at it more as the pressure is on Notre Dame more so to win, whereas Clemson is playing with house money right now. If they lose, they have the quote-unquote out as far as, well, Trevor didn't play. They didn't have 3 defensive starters. It was on the road. It was only the second career start for DJ. They're playing with house money. They've got nothing to lose, and not that I'm saying that they're coming in with that attitude. Whereas with Notre Dame, it's like, here it is, guys. It's all laid out for you. You're at home. They traveled. They don't have their Heisman-winning, potential quarterback. They've lost 3 starters. You don't do it now, Notre Dame. When are you going to do it? So it's not lose-lose. It's just right now the pressure is more on Notre Dame from that perspective. But maybe on December 19th, it changes.
Now, Patrick, Lou just mentioned they're out Trevor Lawrence, and of course they're out some other starters as well. Tell us who else is Clemson out? Everyone's talking about Lawrence, but there are some other key players that the Tigers are going to be missing. Tell us about those guys.
They're going to be without 3 main guys in their front 7. I think it starts with defensive tackle Tyler Davis, interior player, really disruptive guy, second-team All-ACC as a freshman a year ago. And we've seen Notre Dame double-team, some of the previous opponents, like standout interior linemen. We'll see if they still do that now with, Davis's replacement or replacements, but certainly a less of a force and consistent disruptor that Notre Dame doesn't have to worry about with him out. And then they're without 2 primary linebackers, and James Skowski, who's a captain, and Mike Jones Jr., 2 guys who've gotten a lot of playing time and are consistent in playing the run and overall just providing disruptive plays there as well. So they're also going to miss defensive end Xavier Thomas, former 5-star recruit for the first half. He was ejected against, I believe, Boston College last week for a targeting penalty in the second half. That, of course, means he won't play until the second half against Notre Dame. Clemson's got a lot of depth up there on the defensive line and defensive ends in particular, with a couple of really impressive, highly ranked freshmen. But, yeah, a lot of personnel losses on defense there too.
Lou, I think we can all agree that for Notre Dame to win this game, they have to establish the run. And with Clemson having these guys out, you would have to think that the stars are kind of aligned. Like Notre Dame's a rushing offense, and now you have multiple guys in Clemson's front 7 out for at least the first half and some out for the entire game.
Yeah, Notre Dame is coming into the game with a 231-yard rushing average. And I know that so much of the pre-game theme is about Ian Book's got to take deep shots. He's got to connect. He's got to be more consistent. He can't have the happy feet, etc. But so much of it also comes down to Notre Dame being able to establish their strength, which is the running game. Because in these marquee matchups, Mike, Alabama in 2012 national championship, 19 carries for 32 yards for Notre Dame. That was a year they averaged over 200 yards rushing. It goes on and on. When they lost to Clemson in a monsoon in 2015, never got the ground game going. Deshaun almost rallied them with the pass. Georgia, 2017. That Notre Dame team with Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey averaged 270 yards rushing a game, 55 yards rushing. against Georgia. Last year at Georgia, 46 yards rushing on 14 carries. They pretty much, packed it in as far as saying we can't run against these guys. Clemson, Dexter Williams, 16 carries, 54 yards in the playoff game. Notre Dame had 88, I believe, in that game. I'm not saying Notre Dame has to hit its average of 231, but what you cannot do is have those 40, 50, 60, double-digit outputs there, because that just puts way too much pressure on the passing game, which I don't know where Notre Dame can thrive in there. So, again, I'm not saying it has to be 231 yards, the average. If they can be a solid, efficient 130, 140 yards, 4.5 yards a carry, no fumbles, and no fumbles returned for 90-yard scores, then I think Notre Dame can put itself in a very good position like they did against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's the number one run defense, and Notre Dame had only 115 yards, but they were an effective 115 yards as far as moving the chains, book scrambling out of pocket, and just being able to open up some areas with the passing game, which they did.
Yeah. Lou, you mentioned the Georgia game last year. I think Ian Book had a fine game. It's just tough for him to – I just don't think he's the quarterback to let's put it all on his shoulders and make us win the football game. Patrick, what would you say would be a successful rushing day for Notre Dame? And then when you look on the defensive side of the ball for the Irish, they got to stop Travis Etienne. What would you think that they need to hold him to?
So I wrote about this morning on blueandgold.com. You can check it out. And Lou mentioned that Pitt game. That to me is kind of a good blueprint for maybe what you can expect and what would be successful. I know it sounds crazy to say when take out the sacks and they ran for 120 yards and 2.5 yards a pop, but that surface number kind of lies a little bit. And Brian Kelly would tell you the same thing when I asked him about this on Thursday. And really what it comes down to is rushing efficiency and being able to get the yards when they matter. Against Pitt, still in that same game, every time they ran it on 3rd and short, they got it. Again, that's excluding a sack that goes down as a run, but that's not a run play. And the what Brian Kelly would call efficiency or success rate, whatever you want to do, the advanced metric, Notre Dame actually fared pretty well there when you consider the lack of chunk runs or the 2.5 yards a carry average. And then that really just means that you're staying out of big negative runs and run stuffs. So you're not putting yourself completely behind schedule in the chains. So if you can do something like that, where your efficiency rate against Pitt, it was 36%. I think if you go somewhere around there against Clemson, whose efficiency or success rate run defense is right around the same mark as Pitt's, that you'll be pretty happy with that. And that if you're able to pick up the 3rd and short runs and get the yards where the yards matter, in a sense. Not all rushing yards or yards in general are created equal. So I think that Pitt game is an example of how a game that seems like not a great rushing performance is actually one that could do the job, at least enough. Other things would have to happen, of course, for Notre Dame to be able to move the ball well enough on Clemson's defense to win a lower-ish scoring game in the 20s. And yeah, on defense with Travis Etienne, that's the one guy that you can't let completely take over a game as he's want to do, because he's the best running back in the country to me. So if you're Notre Dame's defense, I think you just load up and do everything you can to take him out of the game as much as you possibly can. And if someone else beats you, that's okay. And the Clemson of a couple of years ago, if you did that, you'd be very worried about what those two receivers and T. Higgins and Justin Ross can do. They're not here anymore. Obviously, Amari Rodgers is still a really good receiving threat who can, even though he's a slot receiver, can beat you deep, go up and get the ball, make plays in space, but not quite that almost unguardable receiving core. So I think you take your chances with whatever they can do, with what DJ Uiagalelei can do, and just really make sure that Travis Etienne doesn't beat you in all the ways Clemson uses him as a runner and receiver.
Now, chances are, if you're watching this video, you have not been to a Notre Dame game this year. Patrick, you have been our on-site reporter covering the home games. In a normal year, I can only imagine just how bonkers this game would be. But obviously we're not in a normal year. It's students, parents, and some other faculty that's allowed to go to the home games right now. What are you expecting the atmosphere to be like on Saturday?
I don't think it'll be much different from what we saw in the first 4 home games because, I mean, you're not putting in more than 11,000 people that were there in the first 4. And there was a pulse. And maybe, who knows, this is a night game. It's Clemson. People come a little more fired up or whatnot. But, yeah, I don't think it'll be anything different, or when you walk into the stadium or looking around at kickoff, that it feels different than whatever it felt like, and exactly what it felt like against Duke, which was lively enough. And early in all of those games, there were moments, there was noise. Players would tell you they didn't really sense that much of a difference, but obviously, of course, they're pretty locked in with what they're doing. But yeah, I'm not expecting to walk into the stadium and walk around there and really feel anything different that I did in the season opener or any of the 3 games after that. So it'll be subdued, almost like it's, like if you drove past the stadium during the game, you wouldn't know that there's this massive game going on that the entire country's watching.
I think the only thing that might be different between Clemson and the other home games is just a kind of aura. It's like, this is the game we've been talking about all year. That might be the only thing that might be different. Lou, this is your favorite thing to do. I know your very favorite thing to do is give a score prediction for a game. What do you got, Mr. Samoji?
Here's my prediction, guys. Notre Dame and Clemson will play again on December 19th. They will split this year. I said that in the preseason. I'm going to stand by it. Whether it's on December 19th or November 7th, I have no freaking clue. I don't know. It's all made for Notre Dame to win tomorrow. It's there. It's there for the taking. It's on for you to take it there. You got to seize it. But as crazy as this year is, it probably might more likely occur on December 19th when everyone is expecting Clemson to hammer Notre Dame again, this time whichever launch. That's the kind of year it's been. So for now, I'll do everyone a favor, because for 15 years, against USC in 2005, against Alabama in the BCS championship, against Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, against Clemson in the playoff, I have emphasized Notre Dame is due. It's due to win one of these games. Georgia, I actually picked Georgia last year because I got tired of it. So you're all welcome. I'm picking Clemson in this game. Well, let's get some reverse psychology mojo going.
Patrick?
Yeah, I like these predictions. I mean, I'm open. No one's going to bat 1,000 on these things. I've went with the same thing since we heard Trevor Lawrence is going to be out. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going Clemson 22, Notre Dame 19. I think it'll be maybe a little more offense and offensive production than that score might let on. But a lot of red zone stands, and both of these defenses are, one, hard to move the ball on. But even if you do move on, I'm very good at limiting damage when you do get down there into touchdown striking distance. So I think we'll see some field goals and some drives sputter out there a little bit. I think it'll kind of come down to who gets one more red zone touchdown or makes one more red zone trip, even if that's a field goal. With deciding who that's going to be, I'm still going to side with Clemson and think that Travis Etienne will do just enough to keep them moving, as will DJ Uiagalelei. I think we saw last week he's plenty capable. And, yeah, I think Clemson's defense will hold serve just as much as it needs to keep Notre Dame under 20 points. But as long as it's in the 20s, especially low 20s like that, Notre Dame absolutely has a shot and should be in this thing for 60 minutes.
Make sure to go to blueandgold.com. You have our BGI staff predictions, tons and tons of coverage of Clemson week on our website. For the record, I picked Notre Dame in the upset, one of 5 staff members to go with the upset. Appreciate you guys watching. Again, make sure to go to blueandgold.com for all of your Notre Dame Fighting Irish coverage.